This is a production of Cornell University.
So Dr. Heather Darby is a soils and agronomic specialist for UVM Extension. Heather is involved with implementing research and outreach programs in the area of fuel, forage, and grain production systems in New England. Her outreach focuses on delivering on-farm education in the areas of soil health, nutrient management, organic grain, and forage production. Her research is focused on traditional and niche crop variety trials, weed management strategies, and cropping systems development. So I can say that this is not the first time Heather has presented here. She's presented at NICO meetings in the past, and also runs the Vermont Organic Grains Conference. So similar type of conference to this, maybe larger and some different people, but I encourage you to check that out. If you've not been up there before, I was there last year, had a great time. So please help me welcome Dr. Heather Darby.
So there has been a renewed interest in growing oil seeds again, and I say renewed because it was like a decade, 15 years ago, we had a very strong interest in oilseed production, but primarily focused on producing biofuels. And we had many projects for about 10 years, focused on figuring out if we could produce fuel on our farms, from field to fuel tank. That's a great one-liners there. And we worked with farmers all over Vermont to set up infrastructure, oil presses, biofuel reactors. If you want to have the university get all worked up about something on your per card, purchase a reactor. Anyway, and it was a time when diesel fuel prices had gone up a lot. They were over $5 a gallon. So when that happens, naturally people are interested in figuring out how to cut costs. And do things on their own, like farmers like to do, right? So we spent, again, a decade trying to figure out all the different pieces of growing your own fuel. And so if these slides look like they're from 15 years ago, they are. Actually, I don't even, it's not in a PPTX. That's how old it is. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. I tried to update them a little bit, but it's hard to make me look 20 years older in this. So most of our oilseed work focused on sunflowers, and I know there's again another strong interest that I've heard here about growing sunflowers. So I can tell you all the things not to do, which I think is probably the most helpful. We've also done a lot of work with canola, and we continue to do a lot of work with winter canola in particular. I can also tell you all the things not to do. If you don't want to be successful, I can tell you how to do that, which is good. Save you a ton of time, years. We also did a good amount of work with flax, which is on my top 10 list of crops that I hate. I know. The other ones include hemp and hops, by the way. What's that other one? Camelina, pennycress. There's a few others that kind of get in that list. It is beautiful. Look how beautiful it is. Dainty and pretty. Well, it's really hard to grow and be successful with it. And I think Peter Martins and Klaus, you've grown this. How much do you love flax?
It's extremely hard to harvest.
Yeah. Okay. And there's a lot of things I dislike about it. Okay. And then hemp, we've done a lot of work with that for grain as well. So there's a whole number of oilseed crops out there that you can grow that can be grown here. Soybeans, I didn't even put that one up here, but soybeans don't produce much oil. So if you're trying to get gallons per acre, soybeans aren't hurt the crop to grow. And if you're trying to market the oil itself from a culinary perspective, it's also not really that popular. So the number one oil seed that we've worked with that people have been really interested in from a culinary perspective is sunflowers. Plus, they're really beautiful. And people like them. And it makes people smile. And it builds relationships and makes your neighbors happy. And people that drive by are happy. And everybody's happy. Right? You grow the sunflowers, you know how happy it makes you. I'm happy, I'm just looking at it. You can't see the pictures of sunflowers. I'm looking at it. So I'm gonna focus on growing sunflowers. I think it's a really appropriate crop for organic production. It does take a good amount of fertility, but it's also really good at getting it, right? It's, a good crop in a rotation, and it's pretty darn weed competitive once it gets out of the gangly teenager stage. It doesn't seem to be as wimpy as corn against weeds, and when you're combining it, unless it's really, they're above most of the weeds. So when you're just taking off that yellow part there, so you're not, trying to get down low. So you can, the crop itself can accept quite a bit of weeds and still be successful. And I hope that didn't offend anybody that I'm assuming have a lot of weeds. I'm sorry. But so let's talk about seed sources. The seed industry itself, as everybody knows, has consolidated a lot, and that includes the sunflower seed availability in industry. There used to be at least one variety of certified organic oil seeds that was available back in the day. The Defender, Klaus used to carry it through Lakeview. As far as I know, and if someone is buying certified organic seed somewhere, raise your hand, but for the most part, for commercially available sunflower oilseed genetics, you're going to have to work with one of these companies to get untreated seed. New seed has always been really good to us as far as having seed that wasn't treated. I don't know if anybody has used them. They used to be Seeds 2000 years ago. Now it's New Seed, and plus the names of their varieties are so cool. Camaro, Defender, Cobra, Badger. They are still in business. They carry a wide range of maturities and options and resistance to disease. I think they're a great company, and they will work with you. At least they did with me even just a year ago on getting untreated seed. But you really need to get a hold of them pretty early on in the game. I think people know with the war in Ukraine, and Ukraine's a big producer of sunflowers. There was sunflower shortage, and then a lot of people started growing sunflowers. So then there also was a seed, I don't want to say shortage, but they were selling out pretty quick. Cropland Genetics always had a lot of really good varieties, again, that fit into our season here. And then of course you have Mycogen and Pioneer, Vermont. They're actually, especially Vermont, and I don't know if you can get untreated seed from them, but they're owned by a French company, and they have a big sunflower division as well. So what maturity should you be growing? We also did really well with early to mid maturing varieties. And for most people, I would definitely stay with a mid-maturing variety. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. The later varieties definitely can yield a bit more. but it can be exceptionally difficult to get them dry to harvest in the fall. So, being able to get them out of the field actually in September, I would say is pretty advisable. Once you get into October, you know, the weather, it's unpredictable anyway, but just the amount of moisture that we get and the amount of actual drying time, decreases a lot. And, it makes it difficult to harvest or get the crop harvested. Okay, so if you're buying seed, one of the things to pay attention to besides maturity is the size of the seed. So you can buy size 2, size 3, or size 4. I don't know if you can buy size 5, but it does go up to size 20. So if you think about a sunflower head, right, you got the biggest seeds on the outside, and as you go into the middle, the seeds get smaller and smaller and smaller, and sometimes there's not even viable seed in the middle of the head. So when those get harvested for seed production, they're graded, and the bigger 2s, 3s, and 4s are what are kept for seed production. So size 2 is the biggest, and then it goes down in size, and size 4 is smallest. A lot of people would say, well, size 2, they're more bigger, they're gonna come out of the ground faster. There's a lot less size 2 available to buy, and there's a lot more size 4. And I think size 4s were fine, but the big thing here is that you have a corn planter or some kind of planter that can handle whatever seed size you're gonna buy. All right, now talk about that more. So this is one slide for the whole presentation. I just want you to know. When do you plant the sunflowers? Well, you should wait till the ground's 50 degrees, just like corn, really. And you know, the warmer the ground is, the faster the seed's gonna come out. And since you're not using treated seed, I would suggest that you wait. Ideally for us, the first full week of June was always the best time to plant the sunflowers. Not necessarily always the best weather, but it helped us avoid bird damage. And it also helped us avoid the banded sunflower moth, which are the 2 of the biggest issues that we had. And so it wasn't really the fact that we couldn't plant earlier, but planting during that week in June helped us avoid 2 of the major pest issues that will be problems for you. The birds will be a problem, and they will eat all of your research plots. Lickety split. And most of the farmers that I've worked with that have grown oil seeds said, figure out how much they'll eat and plant that much for the birds, and then plant your crop. So, up in Quebec, Loic Duavrin that used to grow sunflowers up there, he planted 5 acres for the birds. But then they will wipe out your whole crop. All right, so you can plant with a regular corn planter, all different types. But, you know, if you're using like an old finger pickup type, you're gonna wanna make sure the seeds will get picked up by the fingers. If you're using a vacuum type and you have different discs, you're gonna wanna make sure you get a sunflower disc. The seed are really, well, you know, you squish them, right? You can break them pretty easy. So think about putting that seed through a planter and how easily it can get damaged. And once it's damaged, it's hard for it to grow. So if you want to get really good populations, you need to make sure that you have your planter set up properly. The right amount of vacuum, the right plates, the right finger pickup. And I think a lot of us learned that the hard way. Seed was coming out, it was going in the ground, but apparently we were damaging a lot of it and we were ending up with really bad stands. So something to consider. As far as seeding rate goes, everybody will argue with me about this, probably nobody here, but in a different audience. We would have trouble getting stands, and I think some of that had to do with the planter. Maybe sometimes the conditions. We generally were planting at 37,000 seeds per acre. Now, if you go online and you look at the Manitoba website or North Dakota or whatnot, they'll say anywhere from like 15 to 20,000 seeds per acre. It's a desert there, first of all. It's not really, but it's dry, so it's a lot of dry land farming. We get a lot of moisture, and I'll talk about what happens when you have low stands and a lot of moisture. So we can have higher stands, and I think your final population should be around 25 to probably 28,000. But to get that final population, especially as you're dialing in on your planting process, whatever planter you have, you should probably seed around 30,000, maybe a little more per acre. Just to kind of dial things in, but your final population, again, can be quite a bit lower. As far as fertility goes, it's somewhat similar to corn, needs very similar amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but it's really efficient at nutrient uptake. It has a really, really deep taproot that can pull up nutrients from a much different depth than corn. And so I will show you some slides about over-fertilizing sunflowers and what happens. So this is, in organic farming, something you need to think about, especially what crop you're going to follow the sunflowers with, because you don't want to add too much nitrogen. You'll kill your crop, and I'll show you some evidence of that. Oh, geez. We'll get moving through here. So seed size and planter type, I talked about this, a whole bunch of stuff, different planters you can use. Most anything really will work if you're focused on planting the sunflowers. Here's the picture of, corn planter with fingers, what the sunflower fingers look like versus the corn fingers. Again, about the seed size, number of seeds per pound. Sunflower seeds, expensive. And I don't know how much have you guys bought some? I can't remember what my last bag was, but it's not as expensive as corn. I guess like 400. But a bag, size 4s should have 225,000 seeds in a bag, roughly, give or take, like 223,000. 224,000. If you're planting 20,000 seeds per acre, you can get quite a few acres out of a bag. Okay, so planting more seed, you're going to get less acres, so it'll add to your cost of production. But until you kind of get, moving through and figuring it out, stay with a slightly higher population. This is a great table that's on the North Dakota site that really talks about seed sizes, planter types, vacuum pressure, all that kind of stuff. So this is available online to kind of help you get started. It does list quite a few different types of planters. Very useful document. I can send it to folks if you can't find it. All right, so rotation. If you're growing sunflowers, mostly, folks in organic rotate well anyway, and they have diverse rotations. But it is not even advisable to grow 2 years of sunflowers. And I will tell you firsthand that you will see yield decline in the second year quite a bit. And this is out of Minnesota conventional production, but you gotta rotate. And the rotation should be long, like 6 years minimum. Because they get a lot of diseases. As far as yields go, the best yields we've ever seen were, 5,000 pounds an acre. again, you know, some years are good, some years are bad. I think 2,000 pounds is not unheard of, and normally you would get 2,000 to 3,000 pounds. And you can see varieties yield different depending on, you know, the maturity and the variety itself and the genetics. Okay. So the less plants we have per acre is good. We save money on seed costs, as an example. But what we found was that we would end up with these ginormous sunflower heads, like not that big, but pretty big. And because we have a lot of moisture, we also have a lot of fertility in our soils, which is different than a lot of places that grow sunflowers. And we would end up with these humongous plants, which sounds great, right? The yield should be the same, the head's 3 times the size, less cost, but it was virtually impossible to get those dried down enough to actually put them through the combine. So if you've ever taken a sunflower head and broken it in half, it's like a sponge in the middle, right? And what do sponges do when it rains or when they get wet? They suck up a lot of moisture. And so we just those huge heads, we could never get them dried down. It was almost impossible. But then if it was wet and it was late, they would just hold so much moisture. Even if the seed was dry enough to harvest and the plant is mature, that spongy part takes forever to dry down. And the bigger it is, the longer it takes. And so we actually found that by increasing the populations and having smaller plants and smaller heads, it dried down a lot faster and made harvesting that much easier and more uniform. You also have the plants at the end of the field that, like, they're huge. They're semi trucks. You know, you bring your combine in there and it's like, it just about throws up trying to get that sunflower head through the combine. Anyway, is that an appropriate noise? I saw it. Heard that, right?
Very good.
Thank you. All right, so what do you think happened here? I'm driving to the research plot. Gotta be close to harvest. Let's bring the plot combine.
Neighbors.
Bears. No, wasn't bears. The neighbors. Yeah, they had a wedding and they wanted sunflowers for their daughter's wedding. No. Nope. It's a combination of things, but the primary thing, this was a nitrogen study. There, at the end of the day, my scientific background led me to believe that there was too much nitrogen and the plants lodged. They got really tall and lodged. They were all lodged. And I've seen, not just at this site, this is a little bit of a shocker, but seen it on farms, you see it on patches on farms, you know. And so too much nitrogen is not a good thing with this crop at all. And it's very efficient at taking up nitrogen. We always seem to get, you know, better yields on our research farms where we had a long history of dairy manure applications when we just didn't put anything. So, you know, we could definitely go a year in sunflowers without fertilizing with any nitrogen and usually get really good yields. But again, you have to understand what your, you know, sort of background nitrogen is, because if you open any book from anywhere else, it'll tell you sunflowers need between 100 and 200 pounds of nitrogen. If you're going to get 2,000 pounds, you need at least 100 pounds of actual N going into that plant, which could mean, you know, you need to put on 150 pounds or maybe even more. So that's kind of what we were doing, and it was hard for us to get a crop. They were lodging all the time. So we just stopped actually putting nitrogen on when we knew we were going into fields that were, had a good amount of fertility on them. We would see a response from nitrogen when we were on more depleted soils, but we would barely see a response otherwise. So we know that they require a lot of nitrogen, but they're also very efficient at taking it up and digging deep into the soil profile for it. And again, when we did studies, this was on sand. We would see a response at about a 90-pound rate. Okay, and the reason we would see often lower yields at higher rates is that we would see lodging, not because it wasn't enhancing yield. All right, so as far as weed control goes, the sunflowers responded well to time weeding and cultivation. Time weeding works really well to control weeds. It does with anything as long as you hit the timing right. But if we time weeded a little too much, sometimes we reduce the populations, especially a little bit later. Since it's like 6 days after planting and 12 days after planting, we could reduce the population and see some issues. But again, we also, without any weed control, could see good yields. So it is more weed competitive than a crop like corn. Some of that has to do with its ability to scavenge nutrients. It's growing in a different part of the soil profile than many of the weeds, I think. So it is a pretty resilient crop in that way. All right. And here's the average rooting depth of sunflowers. It's quite deep. Oops, I showed this. We did a lot of work with interseeding into sunflowers as well, and they actually work better in interseeding systems, way better than corn, because the canopy isn't quite as thick, and it opens up a lot faster than corn does. So we had really good luck interseeding cover crops into sunflowers, a lot better than we did into corn. All right, the biggest disease issue that we started to run into was white mold, sclerotinia, and again, rotation is key for any of the diseases that sunflower gets. It also gets a lot of downy mildew, so you want to select resistant varieties. White mold is an issue, so if you're growing other broadleafs, that's something to think about in your rotation. I don't know if this happens in other crops, but the scary thing about white mold and sunflowers is that it can actually travel plant to plant through the roots. And you can just see whole rows going down from white mold, from one infection point on one plant. So this is one of the primary reasons why you want to be really careful if you're going to grow this crop, and how close it is to other white mold sensitive crops, which is basically broadleaf. And if you start to see white mold, be very, very cautious, because it can spread this way. I've never seen that in any other crops. So okay, banded sunflower moth. This was our primary pest, and it got so bad in some years that we couldn't figure out why we weren't getting any yields, and we didn't see any bird damage. And we were combining, I'm like, wow, there's so much seed here. You could hear it coming out of the heads. Well, it was all blowing out of the back of the combine because this nasty little Darby had eaten all the middle of the seed out. And so in years when it was really bad, it heavily impacted yields. And again, the best way that we found to manage this is by delaying the planting date. Birds. This is from a picture up north. There they are. There's a lot of them. And obviously, the more birds you have, the less yield you have. Okay, so what do? You plant some for the birds. We did a lot of work trying to find the right shaped head for the job. We read a lot about some varieties, their heads fold down when they dry, and some varieties cup up. And some varieties are face up and some varieties drop. So we thought, well, we'll find the variety that's resistant to birds. We never did. So if it cups up, it becomes a bird bath because it fills with water, and then they stand on the edge and they take a drink, and then they put their body and their beak over the edge and peck the seeds out. And then you go to the sunflower and it's full of bird seeds and water and poop. And then, you know, if it was face up, they could just eat it. So I don't know if selecting variety is really, was really that useful. But, because it seemed like they were pretty much all just acceptable. But what we did find was, again, delaying the planting date till that first full week in June really helped us avoid bird damage. Because you know, when the red-winged blackbirds flock up, right? You either don't want the seed ready at that point, or you want it already out of the field. All right. There's some nitrogen issues, lodging, and deer. If you have a lot of deer, they will just bite the head right off before you even see it. So just something to think about. Okay, harvesting out in places where they harvest sunflowers. They have these things called sunflower pans or a sunflower head, which we didn't have. And if you try to harvest them without this, you'll lose quite a bit of yield because the heads come off and then they bounce out when you're laughing because you can see them. Woo, they're going in. Nope, they're bouncing back out. So the pans just kind of catch the heads as you're cutting them off, and then brings them into the combine. So the farm that we worked with on these projects, they built their own out of plywood and plastic and whatever they had on the farm. So it works really well. You can build them on your own. And then we built some for the combine too. Just bolted them on and off when we weren't using them. Okay, so I think I'm just gonna go down to the oil processing part because I don't know, Matt, when am I done?
That's Chris.
10 minutes ago.
You have a couple minutes.
Okay. So I've done work in all the other oil seeds too, and I'm happy to talk about that, but I know people were interested in oil pressing. And all this stuff is on my website. And I did bring a few copies of some of the booklets on small scale oil processing, oil seed, information about the presses. It's all still relevant today. And I don't know if all these models are still available or not, but they're listed there, and those are all the ones we trialed. So on average, we would get 74 gallons of sunflower oil per acre. Okay, so if you're wondering like what your yield of oil would be, you can plan between, 50 and 75 gallons. These are the different presses that we've used and operated. They're all available on a small scale. And the ag oil press M70, I think you can still get these. These were the only American-made press. They were manufactured in Wisconsin, and of all the presses, it ended up being the best one. Largest scope of what you can actually press with it. Okay. This is what all these were all screw presses. And they all operate basically in the same way. So you put the seed in, and it extrudes it through that barrel under pressure and speed, and the oil comes out and the meal comes out the other end. So like I said, we evaluated all of these. Obviously those costs are from 14 years ago. I'm sure they cost a lot more now, probably double, I imagine, if not more. But all that information is in the report, in the capacity, what you can adjust on them. And more information about how much capacity they could do. Most of them were meant to do about 1,000 to 2,000 pounds a day of seed. And you can see this is our capacity that we documented. Here's just a couple of pictures of the presses and the meal coming out of it. We did a lot of work with the Chinese presses. They're cheap, maybe not anymore. And you had to mess around with them a lot. They weren't very automated. They were hard to adjust, but they were cheap. I think at the time that was $1,500 for that big mega press. None of the dials or buttons worked. Like nothing actually worked. So we had to get it running, but once we did. And that's the ag oil press. I would recommend this one. It had the best service, people that could work with you, call. This is the percent oil we're getting out. So again, we're getting anywhere from basically 30 to 40% oil out of the seed. Moisture content is really important when you're pressing seed, so we know it's important when you're storing seed, but you actually want the seed pretty dry, not too dry, and you don't want it too wet to get the most oil out of it. So usually we were starting around 7% moisture, 8% moisture. If you have too much moisture, which can be like 10%, you'll see the meal will start coming through, you won't be getting any oil. And if it's too dry, you'll hear the whole press going, trying to squeeze the seed through it, and you also won't get any oil. So moisture content is really important. Okay, so last piece about culinary oil. We had a lot of people interested in this, especially at the end of our project. And so when you buy oil in the store, it all looks the same, it's all the same color, more or less, and it all pretty much tastes the same, except for maybe olive oil and some of your kind of finer, high-end oils. And that's because they're refined, they're bleached, and they're deodorized. So they look the same, they have no color, and they taste like nothing, okay? So you actually can do most of these on a small scale if you wanted to. We kind of figured out how to do that, but I doubt that's the market people want to get into. So really the biggest thing that people need to do after you press the oil is to filter it. And again, you can do that just by letting it sit and all the gunk goes to the bottom. Or you can buy like simple stock filters, or you can do things that are more complex, like a filter press, something like you put cider through, other food products. So the filtering just gets out the gunk, and it can take out some of the phospholipids, makes it a slightly cleaner product. And if you are trying to do any high heat cooking, you definitely want to try to have a finer filtration process to get out some of those phospholipids. If you're just using it to make salad dressings and maybe doing a little baking, you can just let it settle and it'll be great. The shelf life of unrefined oils we found to be much better than commercial oil. So this is accelerated shelf life studies that we did with Penn State back in the day. And because you're not taking all the good stuff out of the oil, then it actually has a longer shelf life because there's more antioxidants and things like that left in the oil. So we found that the oil actually could last several years without changing taste or really color. Okay? As far as sensory and consumer testing, we did a little bit of this as well with Penn State, made Italian dressing out of it and put it in front of people. And you know, it was different. It wasn't really meant to be the same. And you know, it could be very similar to commercial oil, but at the end of the day, it still tastes like the plant because you haven't bleached it, you haven't deodorized it. So if you're producing sunflower oil, it's gonna taste like sunflowers. And if you bake with it, we're done, gonna taste like you're standing there impatient. Okay. We did convert tractors over to run off from straight vegetable oil, which works really well in the summertime, as you can imagine. This is a whole process in itself. We had one tractor that could run just off from the vegetable oil we were producing. But we also got into making biodiesel on many different scales. That was our largest scale down in southern Vermont, to the smallest scale, which was this little compact unit. That's what we used on the research farm, and we produced all the diesel fuel that we needed for the research farm with that little unit. See, it had a little gas pump next to it. It's pretty cool. You just like put the little ingredients there on the side, and then hit the buttons. These buttons worked, and then you waited for 24 hours and you get a little gas pump and and so there were a lot of ways that we tried to make diesel fuel, but we could actually make ASTM grade fuel at our larger facilities. So it's 100% possible to grow your own fuel, make it on your farm. That's a different kit. Again, this was 10, 15 years ago, but these were the different farms making fuel, and it was costing people anywhere from 98 cents to $3 a gallon. See, you woke up. $1, yeah, 98 cents. When I was 5, they sold gas for a nickel. But I mean, you know, people were really excited about this because it's $5 a gallon, you know? And so Mark and Bill, they were at the largest scale. They also were kind of had more efficiencies on their farm. The research farm, that's Roger, he was producing fuel for about $3. That was with that smaller system that I was talking about. So, you know, people were doing it, they were doing it very cheap. But I will say nobody's doing it anymore. All right, so one of the benefits was to get the meal. We were talking about this pellet mill. Last night, we got this out of China. We had a big China shopping spree one year. So most of it's in the hedgerows right now, but we got everything that we could get in a box on a ship for like $25. I think this pellet mill cost like $250 or something. But anyway, you can make briquettes. We still have it. You can make briquettes with it. You can make all different size pellets. So you're getting this meal, which is another product of growing the oilseed. And we pelletize everything. I was telling somebody this last night. They're just but the meal itself is a really valuable resource. It's very high in protein, and we all know that soybean meal, canola meal, these byproducts are fed in the livestock industry. So this was really exciting to people in the project because most of them were livestock, growers. The downside was that our oilseed meal still had a lot of oil in it, right? When you commercially extract oil out of seed, they usually use hexane to get out the last driplets. Well, clearly, we're not using hexane, right? So we had a lot of oil left in that meal, so it gave the meal really high fat content, which limited the amount of meal that we could feed to a rumen, because it would, you know, upset the whole process in there, too much fat. And we did do a feeding trial, kind of looked at all of this. But what we ended up doing was looking at this as a fertility source, and a really good organic fertility source. You know, between 4.5% and 6% nitrogen is pretty high for most organic fertility sources. So people were putting it back on the land, and, you know, using it primarily as a fertilizer. We did see in some of our studies when we were using canola and mustard meal that it actually suppressed weeds. I also killed all our corn with it too. Just like I said, don't knock it off too much. That was a lesson learned. Some is good, too much is too much. I killed the weeds and the corn, nothing grew. So it worked well. So there's a lot of nitrogen, you know, in those meals, and we could definitely fertilize the corn crop by putting the meal back on the land. We also burned it, so we used it as a fuel source because there's still a lot of oil in it. So we pelletized it and put it in a pellet stove and heated the shop with it. So it was an exciting time. Times are back. It's an exciting time again. Lots of uncertainty. Who the heck knows what's going to happen tomorrow? But you can grow your own fuel. Yeah, you can do it. You got the power. And I know the oil seed mill. I can help you guys out. We can do it together. But that's what we're interested in, is sort of like who's in the loop, you know, growing the oil seed, the farmer pressing the oil, selling the virgin oil as a value-added product, and then getting the waste vegetable oil back to be made into biodiesel back on the farm. Using the meal to feed animals or feed the soil, and then, well, interestingly enough, the administration changed. And the money that we were getting to do this project and the focus on the project just, yeah, there we are. All right, the website is all there still, so you can access it. And there we go.
Think we have time for one question or so? Yeah. Well, we need time to change the slide, so, yeah.
Hey. Oh, okay, good. Which what? Oh, we have.
No, you're picking, I'm picking.
Oh, you're picking on me. Well, we got rid of the Chinese press.
Okay.
The amount of lead paint on it was really, we actually did test that. Dangerously high, so I'm scared to use it.
Sunflowers in 2015 as a double crop after barley, and our customer was pressing them for oil and complained that we had a low oil content. Is there any relationship between oil content and planting date?
Yep. So the oil content could be influenced by like any number of environmental factors. We saw that if there was too much nitrogen, the oil content would be low. If we found, you know, depending on the variety, the oil content could be low. I kind of wonder if in that case, because it was pretty consistent for us, with the exception of the moisture content of the actual seed. So I kind of wonder if it was that.
How many hours per gallon did it require?
How many hours did it take?
Hours per gallon.
Hours per gallon? I don't know. But it's in the booklet. No, it is. There's a whole, like the little economic analysis I showed you. If you go to the website, you can still download all of that information, but also run your own calculations. Yeah, I don't know how many hours per gallon, but a lot. You know, it's interesting because when we first started thinking about this, we knew that it would take acres, obviously, to make your own fuel, and would that kind of pencil out at the end of the day? And we always talked about, oh, well, my grandfather used to have horses, and he had to set aside so much land to feed his horses, so that he had power to run his farm. And so we always started talking about that, like how many acres would it take to actually fuel our farms? But so there's a lot to consider, obviously, in that process. Yeah. Ethanol. No, it's possible. They say it's possible. We never did. And that was a problem that we were starting to have to deal with, was the waste that was being produced, right? You have glycerin, and some other waste, and then like what were we gonna do with that? And you can actually process it and clean it to get the methanol out of it. So I'm only telling you part of the story. You guys know that's how.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.